I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT, and we're here in Santa Clara for Tech Field Day 26. We're having a series of delegate roundtable discussions this morning, talking about topics that are important to us in enterprise tech. And we've talked about VMware, we've talked about the future of the enterprise, we've talked about hyperscale technology. Another topic that I'm hearing about more and more from product vendors, and this is something that is present, maybe ever present in keynotes, is sustainability, green, carbon, climate change, basically the E in ESG. Now, I want to start off by reminding everyone that there's an S and a G in ESG as well. And so just because it's sustainable and green doesn't mean it's ESG. I mean, S is for social and G is for governance. And unless you're addressing those as well, you're not ESG. But E is important. I think all of us would agree that sustainability is important, that climate change and carbon reduction is important for a variety of reasons, stretching from the future of the species to good marketing. All of these things weigh in when you're talking green. I've attended, I think, 4 or 5 enterprise tech conferences, keynotes in person this year, and plus attended a lot of them virtually. Every single one of them has talked about sustainability within the first 10 minutes. Every single one of them has devoted at least a 10-minute segment to sustainability and talking about how their product is greener than everybody else's or has green benefits. And a lot of my customers and clients want to talk to me about this as well. And they're saying, like how can we position our product as an ESG compliant solution that is sustainable? So let's dive into this a little bit. I guess, first of all, let's just have some fun with this. Is this real or is this just marketing?
Well, if I can start here, it's real, but not for the right reason. I mean, so it's real because the energy bill, for example, in Europe, coming from Europe, it's very important problem. The cost of energy is huge now. So everybody's looking at ways to reduce their energy bill. So when it touched your budget, the IT budget, in so dramatically, then everybody's looking for it. But actually, it was not the case in the past because we were more worried about the climate change and other things. I mean, yes, a little bit, but it was not felt the same way. Now that it's touching your wallet, then it's huge. And everybody's looking at reducing data center footprint, you're reducing the energy bill, optimizing every single component of the data center. So it's a part of every discussion with users. So yes.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of that is the hyperscale providers. Their number one cost input is power, and the easiest way for them to improve their profit margins, well, the second easiest, the first is to raise prices. The second easiest way for them to improve their profit margins is to reduce their power consumption. And so if they can make more efficient hardware, I also think it gives them the flexibility to build data centers in regions and more places that might not have the power infrastructure they might otherwise need if they can reduce the power footprint of what those data centers look like.
So it doesn't necessarily come down to something altruistic necessarily. It's more about cost. Is essentially where we're going with this so far.
There's altruistic PR benefits to it.
Right.
But yeah, whichever you're going for, there's a good other benefit though.
Yeah.
They complement each other very well.
Yeah, you can make a decision for altruistic reasons if everything else is the same. If the cost is the same and one of them is better for the environment and everything else is equal, you can do that, but that doesn't negate any of the power savings. Power savings are the things that get the buy-in from the business and let you move forward with it.
Well, the problem is, I think that when you think about energy savings, we think about building better infrastructures. Nobody thinks about building better code. And so you have these developers asking for a lot of resources all the time without thinking about optimizing too much. But maybe coming from the infrastructure, I mean, I am biased, but actually...
Proving code is hard.
No, so you see it with FinOps in the cloud, right?
Yeah,
so everybody's asking for more and more without thinking too much. And then this kind of bad behavior is, exported to the traditional data center. And then, we need FinOps.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, of course, but actually start with thinking before what you're doing and why, and not just, if your CPU is the most efficient of the world.
I think we have to, though. My role is solutions architecture for a company, but we build monitoring solutions for power networks for power companies and railways for rail networks. So we get to look at data, power, and rail networks day to day. The grids worldwide. We need to reduce power because we do not have enough electrical throughput capacity to let everybody plug an electric car in. We need to save energy. The demand over the next decade for electricity through global infrastructure is going to skyrocket. Right now, we're not capable of delivering that. So anything that drives efficiency to reduce the power requirements is going to be a good thing and save money. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think serverless is an opportunity for customers to start to design and program really carefully for exactly the economic-based reasons where we accidentally have an environmental benefit. Right?
Well, if you don't have servers, you don't have a
because if you think about
energy consumption,
regular data center has 4 CPUs or 700 cores or whatever, you can hide behind that hardware with bad code. When you run serverless, you're paying for computation time, and that's a very different equation.
I'm looking forward to applicationless.
We get there. We're doing something.
Well, if we don't do something, we might have to deal with powerless data centers too. So there's that.
Redefining black sites.
Yes. And I think that's one of the nice things about sustainability is that, like I said, it has marketing and messaging benefits, but it also has real tangible benefits in terms of reduced power consumption, reduced footprint, reduced cooling, maybe reduced maintenance. But as you point out, I think that the best thing we could do is improve what we're doing, improve our systems, and consider the impact of our systems. So one of the things that I heard about recently, a company was talking about carbon embedded in silicon. And it took me a minute to figure out what that wasn't a metallurgical discussion, that was a discussion of metaphorical, the carbon cost, the carbon footprint of producing new things, especially tech things. And I think a lot of us sometimes don't think about that. I'll remind you, we had Fujifilm come to Tech Field Day and talk about the sustainability green benefits of tape, literally tape cartridges and storing data on tape instead of on disk or on flash or somewhere else. And it really is remarkable to think about the reduced impact of manufacturing a tape cartridge versus manufacturing a disk drive versus manufacturing storage, flash memory. It's huge, not just the cost of not powering it when it's sitting on the table or on the shelf. And the same is true about a lot of these things. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but you look at a lot of green initiatives in the real world, electric cars and so on. Of course, it takes energy and time and expense to produce these things that allegedly might save us, energy. Is it worth spending that? And maybe that's let's turn that around to the data center here. Is it worth investing in the next generation of technology that is more sustainable, more low energy, or would it be better to maybe make better use of what we have in the data center, or is that just completely impractical? Because there's just no way we're going to do that.
Well, the question could be, can you afford to invest in new technology? Because you're talking about tape. But you can't implement a tape infrastructure today if you are a small company. It's too expensive, it's too complicated. You don't even have people that understand tapes. Think about, a guy that came out of university 1-2 years ago. Tapes? Really? I mean, so they don't understand.
And those of us who do don't want to do it.
Yeah, and so in the end, but again, it's not even the skills that you have to build. It's also the problem of managing and starting this type of infrastructure. So you can. This will simplify your decision-making process, because if you start to input in the cost, the energy bill, that was something that many enterprises weren't doing in the past, then you will think about cloud differently because it will be less expensive for you, theoretically. So you start computing costs that you were not thinking about. And so for a small company, it would be easier to migrate everything to the cloud because it's just more efficient for them.
Stephen, jumping back to your car analogy, that if you've got a 6-year-old Corolla, you are not going to save the environment by upgrading that to a Tesla. That you've got a huge environmental impact on buying something new when you're better off using what you've got, the lifespan that it's designed for, and then making a good decision when it's time to replace that. So the companies that are doing things like ripping out stuff from the data center to put in brand new efficient servers, that they're not doing anything for the environment. The better option is to look at the life cycle of what you've got, then make the good decisions when you're upgrading.
I'm with you 1,000% there. As it naturally comes time to start refreshing our environment and making new investments, yes, it's exactly the time to do it, because what's going to happen to all that old equipment? What, it's going to go sit in a landfill or something like that? Or you're just going to leave it in another room, or maybe even do nothing with it because it's not fully depreciated? Like, who knows? It is important to be environmentally conscious, but your point is excellent, right? What is the cost of that? Is it, I don't even know how to say this, more environmentally economical to wait for the natural resource cycle or do it for your new purchases versus going back and trying to retrofit everything, right? Trying to shove like a square peg in a round hole for the sake of being environmentally friendly.
Is there a responsibility then for the vendors that manufacture this hardware to maybe extend its useful life, because they make it so hard to support it after that initial 3 to 5 year window when the hardware may have more life in it? You don't need to upgrade, but you're being compelled to because it's more expensive to just maintain what you already have.
Well, on that point, I was actually just recently talking to a cloud provider, an infrastructure as service provider, that specifically offers tiers of service for expired hardware. And I thought that was really cool. Maybe I'm blind, but I hadn't seen that before.
No,
and it was pretty neat. They said they had, I don't remember what they called it, but basically they had kind of a value tier where you could get a server or VPS on expired older hardware. And then they even had a value tier that was basically whatever old junk we have around that you can use. And I was like, that's pretty neat as a way to kind of extract some more life out of these things. And what he was telling me was that they just didn't want to de-rack this stuff. I mean, it's in their data center, it's running, it's not dead, but it's not something that they felt like they could sell to customers as infrastructure. So they decided to do this, to offer it, and that it was hugely profitable for them. And the other thing they said, and this was again kind of a lesson from hyperscalers, is that the coolest thing is that with Kubernetes, if you run Kubernetes on these old expired servers, you kind of don't care as much about supportability anymore because you're just using it as a platform, like an expendable platform. So if it dies, Kubernetes will notice and move the stuff and take care of things, and
doesn't it happen with VMware or on an object storage infrastructure or whatever? So I suggested many times the commissioned servers to my clients and build large storage infrastructure for free. But again, they just thinking about having servers out of support in the data center, they don't get it.
There's a lot of vendors will support it. If you're willing to pay more for years 6 and 7 with vendor support than what you were for 1 to 5, you can get it. A lot of them will. They know it's a convenience factor for you not ripping it out and replacing. They will sell you your 6 and 7 support. I think you're right. There's a lot of cases, the likes of Kubernetes is a perfect example where it doesn't, that's not the availability you're aiming for. It's scale out.
The problem with those kind of contracts is you have to buy year 6 and 7 up front. If you have a storage array of, on any random designation, and you go to them 4 years after purchase and say, I'd like to renew this contract, the salespeople are incentivized, the company is incentivized to, rather than that, sell you a brand new array.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're long-term agreement with the vendor, and I think if you go back to them and say, listen, we're not buying new hardware right now. Sorry, Mr. Pre-sales guy, you're not getting commission this quarter. We need support. We'll look at it in a year or 2. They will.
Right. Well, that's when, especially if you don't have buying power, then they'll lean on you with the brand new array. They'll say, hey, here's 6 and 7. It's $150,000, but
Yeah.
Instead, why don't you buy the brand new one for 80 grand?
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah,
that's,
they want you to buy new stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
well, that's why they have incentivizations even in the storage world. It's like, oh, we'll take that off your hands and take it off the field, and we'll give you a rebate. To get,
Yeah.
and then you get
How many times is a selling point? It's so easy to migrate off of when you want to buy new hardware.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and some vendors actually have a pretty compelling story with this. I don't want to, give too much credit to anybody because this is just our discussion. But I really like the pure evergreen approach
Yeah.
where they
That was
basically
really good.
you can have your original, and they have some original like OG storage arrays or array components still deployed. And they actually just this year announced that they're finally going to have to get rid of those. But some of these things are very, very old and they're still running. And maybe it's not the whole thing. Maybe it's just the chassis or or even the power cable. I don't know. But it's still part of the original one that they bought like 8 years ago, and it's still good. I love that because it means that you can really get use out of those things. And maybe that's a hopeful sign, buying OpEx infrastructure instead of CapEx infrastructure, buying support contracts and stuff. Maybe more companies will move in that direction to say, you know what, we're going to allow this stuff to keep running until it's no longer useful.
I think Intel have done well there with foundry services as well. Taking their older fabs, 14 nanometer and larger, and offering to produce chips worldwide for stuff that doesn't need to be 5 nanometer or 7 or 10. There's a lot of. We went through Chipageddon recently. We know, cars were affected, so everything was affected, and there's chips that do not need to be the latest and greatest in terms of technology, but we need them as a society now. So it's great and there was obviously a huge investment of time, carbon, machinery, fuel, everything to build these fabs, and getting more time out of them. It is good for ESG.
Absolutely. And one of the kind of and there's a lot of surprising things that come out of these things. So I was talking about UCIe, which is the new technology that will allow mixing and matching of chiplets on processors. One of the interesting aspects of UCIe is that each of those chiplets can be manufactured at a different process node, meaning that something like a power controller or an I/O chiplet might actually not need to be changed, and it might not need to be manufactured at 7 nanometers or 5 nanometers or whatever. It could be manufactured on the old equipment, and then it can be put on the same chip alongside a tile that's manufactured at 3 nanometers. And they can both work together, and that's okay because this one doesn't need it. And I was thinking, wow, that is actually a really great way to maximize the return on investment. And of course, it probably makes the things more reliable too, because you could have those tiles be proven, and you can have the new one be only the new thing. So there's cool stuff like that might actually, have a knock-on benefit on sustainability. And the same with CXL, right? If you can have a server that's maxed out on memory and you don't want to throw out all the 32 gig DIMMs, but you need a little more memory, adding a CXL memory board in there means that you can continue to use that machine instead of chucking it. And I love that.
Yeah, that's the not buying more compute when you only need more memory, or having to buy the entire chassis. That it's modular enough that you can put in exactly what you need, and only buy that and not have all of the carbon impact of everything else on that server.
Another nice thing about CXL is that if you buy a CXL device a CXL 1 device now, say, well, obviously it can only be RAM expansion at the moment. That'll work in CXL 1, 2, 3, 4. And as long as you have the vendor support, we're back around to vendor support again. As long as you have that vendor support, it'll work in something in 5 years' time. On a much newer version.
Yeah, the PCI Express people deserve a big kudos for making things work. I just saw a brand new Supermicro motherboard with a PCI slot, not a PCIe slot. A PCI slot.
33.
And I was thinking, man, that is so cool because you might have a PCI card you might continue to use. And you can still use that in a brand new server. So and it's the same with, CXL is basically based on PCI, and they're promising that it's going to have that kind of forward compatibility like PCI Express has, all the way back to PCI X, which was a long time ago. So that's pretty cool. Let's actually turn the page here a little bit too. We talked about edge. Is there a green aspect to the shrinking data center and the edge? And I suspect that there might be, because a lot of data centers are built in city centers, in places where power is expensive and limited. Land is expensive, everything's expensive, but they want to do it because it's co-locating and they want to consolidate everything in one data center. And so that's where they put it, like central London or something. If things are at the edge, it's possible too that there could be a knock-on sustainability benefit there too by having things not located in central London and maybe being located closer to the clients, closer to the end users.
Well, and I think you have an inherent, and it's not all edge use cases. And like our earlier discussion about edge, we talked about edge being defined as things that aren't in the data center. But in a lot of true in a lot of edge use cases, you inherently have limited power. So you're not going to have the same level of power. You're not going to have two 750 watt power supplies supporting an edge device. So the power needs are almost nearly always lower.
Or when we're talking about retail, maybe you do have two 750 watt power supplies, but that's feeding single box with switch, firewall, server, everything all at once.
Well, and Chris, actually, I want to bring you into this conversation because you work in connectivity, mobility. What does that look like? Is there an ESG or maybe an E aspect, a sustainability aspect happening in wireless, or is it more we're going to throw this stuff out and get some new ones?
So it's really, again, this is going to be use case dependent. There's a couple of actual standards, 11H being one of them, where power can come down when the radio is not being used. But from a replacement cycle perspective, we've been recommending, the wireless community has been recommending for a long time that the newest standard comes out. Guess what? There's not the client adoption yet. You're not going to be able to use any of those features when the new iPhone comes out. It needs to be 40% adoption before you start to see those real those efficiency benefits and those performance benefits. So there's no benefit for you to go out and replace all of your access points all at once. Just keep an eye on your life cycle of those devices and replace them when you need to, and the infrastructure will catch up and the clients will catch up, and you'll get those benefits eventually.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing, I guess, in networking as well. I know in wireless there's a big question about the physical plant, physical cabling, mm-hmm. and how can you get enough bandwidth back and forth to the ceiling. What's the story on that? Is that a problem, or am I misunderstanding it?
Basically, since Cat 5e, a lot of the plant is still good enough for the new access points that you're not. Most of them, you're starting to see some stuff that's 2.5 and 5 gig, but most of them are still at 1 gig. If you're running 20 or 40 megahertz wide channels, you're still well under 1 gig for the radio. So there's no real benefit for you to rip out that cabling unless there's a problem with it. Certainly you want to, for any physical plant, if you're replacing something at the other end, recertify that cable. Maybe you have to replace some of the ends, but you don't necessarily have to rip out all of it and pull new Cat 6 or Cat 6A. But if you're pulling new cables, that's when, again, you do pull the best cable you can.
And Ethernet has been remarkably adaptable to cabling as well. I've seen gigabit over Cat 3 working just fine, even though it's not supposed to.
Yeah.
It could.
Yeah, it's all.
And if it's working, right?
Yeah, it's all certified for max distance, max power. So if you're not at max distance and you're not at max power, it'll certainly work fine at shorter distances.
As long as it's not silver satin. There you go.
Is there a does PoE play a part in sustainability?
So it's certainly getting more power. So with BT, we're 90 watts out, but very few devices are demanding that. And one of the cool things about PoE is that it's negotiated. So the device can say, hey, here's how much power I need, and I'd like you to deliver that to me. Then the switch can prioritize all of that. So there's a component for sustainability where it can do the negotiation, but there's a lot of vendors that I've started to see pitches on of being able to pull down PoE power after hours. So if you're doing things like PoE lighting, having the switch decide that those lights are going to go off, it becomes a little iffy in public safety scenarios, like with phones. Certainly don't want to be doing that, but there's some options for it. And
Yeah, and we've heard a lot about that with digital building and Cisco and so on, talking about making smarter buildings that can make smarter choices about whether people are still in the building and powering things down and so on. And again, it seems to me that centralized things are more easy to control and make efficient and sustainable than distributed things, generally speaking. So like a central power point, it's easier to green up one power plant than a million cars, or a million homes. And so I guess that's true in the enterprise as well, where maybe we can, have more centralized services that we can then really try to improve efficiency instead of having everybody have a supercomputer on their desk, But that's a thought. I guess that didn't work so well in cloud gaming, right? That seems to be a flop.
I'll take a supercomputer on the desk. If there's one going.
So I guess as IT architects, as people who are working with IT audiences, I want to come back to the central question. Does sustainability resonate with you personally? And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put you all on the spot. I just want to go around and just give me a quick answer. Does sustainability resonate with you and work in your buying decisions? And I'm going to start with our remote people. Arjan, you're unmuted, so you're the first victim. Does sustainability weigh heavily, and how heavily, in your recommendations to enterprise clients?
At the moment, it really doesn't. But I think in the future it will, and it resonates with me. But for most companies, it gets better, especially because the things that Enrique already mentioned in Europe, everything gets very expensive. So it will change in the future, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just take it really down to the basics of data center design, what are two of your biggest costs after the building, right? Power and cooling. So whether people realize it or not, we have had sustainability in mind for quite a long time when we're designing. And I think we're just going to keep on moving forward with it and kind of going up the stack with it, right? Going on to what we've talked about is, can we get longer life out of hardware? When we're replacing it, can we replace it with more effective hardware and stuff like that? So I think it's a trend that we've been following for a long time, even if we haven't been, and it's just becoming more and more important.
I want to say, I mean, I don't really feel that it affects me in a sense that it's not something like, what's the best way I can put this? Sustainability is one of those things that as we evolve, as we change, it's going to always be there, right? Like making sure that we're able to maintain better design outs, better infrastructure. So, I mean, I don't really see too much change. We're just going to keep getting better with it. It's just going to be at the forefront.
I think it's important, but not the ultimate decision maker. I mean, look at the impact that non-sustainability has had. High voltage power. You've had to retrofit your data center for high voltage power because the equipment has gotten so much hotter and demanding more power. If you had sustainability at the forefront of the decision process and design process, it would be different. Then you wouldn't have to have high voltage power, in my opinion. You would have better workloads, more efficient workloads. And that is a component of sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a part of the conversation, but it's not the ultimate decision maker. There's so many other things that you need to think about. Does it meet your use case? Is the vendor account team responsive and supportive? What does the pricing look like? So I think there's a lot of options when you're making equipment or software decisions. This has to be one of them, and I think as we move forward, it's going to get higher and higher on the list.
For the customers I deal with, usually sustainability is not near the top of the list, but a lot of the other decisions they make impact sustainability. So we were kind of talking about like, how long can I use my hardware and how it affects my costs? How much density can I fit within my data centers and my racks based on the amount of power and cooling I can deliver to them? So it's ancillary. It's affected by the decision-making process with most of the customers I work with, which are primarily US-based. I think maybe it's different in other regions of the world, perhaps, where electricity isn't quite as cheap as it is here. We talk about that as an expense, but generally speaking, it's not the biggest expense that I see within my customers, and so it's not a huge part of their sustainability efforts, if they even have them.
For the last 10 years in the MSP space, my answer would be very similar to yours. It's a part of it, it's a consideration, and it's something that needs to be aligned to. And that would have been for definite my answer. In my current role in a private company, our main driver is around sustainability. It's a big thing, it's baked in. And it's part of our value add to get our devices into a customer. So it's a big thing for me at the minute. Yeah.
Well, in general, in Europe is part of a very broad and complex discussion. So everything energy, and yes, it's on top of any conversation with clients and also with vendors. They want to show that they are more interested in in this topic, and they have solutions for the demanding customers from this point of view.
I think you can often get to ESG-based goals from different perspectives that might make more sense to business. So the way that I often approach it is look at what your end goal is and how do we get there in the simplest way possible. A lot of times that means saying no to new purchases and reusing hardware that already exists because you've got the capacity, you've got the CPU. Reorganize your VMware environment to utilize it in tiered ways instead of buying that new server. It keeps things simple, it keeps your footprint small, it means that you utilize the infrastructure you have for as long as possible, saving you money, but also hitting those ESG goals as you go.
So you don't get the shiny new toy.
No new toys.
Yeah.
I'd like to sweat your gear.
I think ultimately the prevalence of the hyperscalers and how much stuff they're buying and their needs for reduced power consumption is going to drive it across the industry. So I don't think there's going to be a choice for most matters other than staying on your legacy hardware forever, which is also an ESG choice.
So from technical perspective, we have talked in the past about the infrastructure, the capacity, the technology, but now as a European guy, it's time to talk more about the energy since the energy prices are getting higher and higher every day. So those of the guys from the C-level people now think about the capacity, if they really need this capacity or we don't need all of the capacity. So things will be changed in a few months, I think.
Yeah, I think things will change in a few months, especially in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think that sustainability is going to become a very strong selling factor in a few months in Europe. And that I think will really, honestly, it could be a catalyst to have this jump forward and become a bigger issue overall. And I think maybe people will realize that IT systems aren't just vulnerable to accidents and cyber attacks, that they're vulnerable to energy issues as well. And so we have to make sure that our systems are sustainable, not just from a green perspective, but sustainable in terms of operations, sustainable in terms of something that we can keep the lights on for. So I think that's going to be a huge trend. And frankly, I think that it also might lend to more use of cloud services, more use of the availability zones and continent size availability zones and all sorts of things that might really change the game. At the same time, I do think, as you all are saying, that this is going to become a more important issue, and companies would be wise to get ready to address it because it's not going away. And so we'll see where this goes. Thank you for your feedback and your insight on this topic and on all the topics that we've covered today. So this